Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Peter Forbes, and together with Michael Specht, we'll be taking you through some of the issues, trends and quirks when it comes to integration cloud style. We also have a couple of representatives from PeoplesHR here with us today, Wajira and Dulantha, who later in the webinar, as we talk about our connector, we might get them to say hello as well. First of all, just a little bit of housekeeping. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. But you can use your little raise hand icon in the control panel if you want to ask a question. It is interactive, so if you've got questions throughout the webinar, we have someone monitoring it, so we're happy to address those as they come up. So today we have myself, Peter Forbes, and Michael Specht taking you through this webinar. Just a little bit about both of us. Oh, and I should say hello, Michael.
Hello, Peter. Hi, everyone.
So look, a little bit of background about myself. I guess I lead a great team of HR technologists in both Navigo and HROnboard. Have over 20 years experience in the HR technology space. And I really have a passion for solving people management issues through great tech. I have many years working in HR operations and surrounding systems. My background is kind of from the HRIS payroll space. And I particularly love doing niche HR spaces that aren't being addressed by many of the larger vendors. Michael is a veteran of the HR industry. That's what I call you now. A veteran. And you played many roles, including customer, consultant, vendor, and analyst. I say you have nearly an encyclopedic knowledge of HR apps. So when it comes to understanding, the vendor landscape, what's out there, what are the trends, where are we going, Michael's the man to talk to. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Peter.
So today, Michael and I will kind of be co-presenting. Michael's got a few slides, I've got a few slides. But today, really, we're going to be discussing integration around cloud applications, why this is now important and what HR should know about it. In this webinar, we'll be delving into some of the common integration types, getting a little bit technical, but it's really at a level that we think HR needs to understand so that they can make informed decisions when they're going to purchase the next HR system. And from every indication we can see in the market is there's a real sort of surge again in looking at some of your core HR systems and also some of those point solutions as well. So we'll be showing talking about those common integration types. We'll show an example between our application, HROnboard, which is an employee onboarding system, and how that integrates to People's HR, which is a cloud-based HRIS system. Look, the topic of cloud integration is very relevant, as I mentioned, as a lot of more companies are moving towards the cloud. However, in our experience of selling a cloud application, there's still a lot of confusion, misinformation, and vendor speak out there. And it's really important to be aware that integration is also a moving target at the moment as the technologies mature. So like a lot of things in the technology space over the last particular 5 years or so, there's been a lot of growth and acceleration and change, and keeping up with that is sometimes not easy. Today, hopefully, we can demystify and clarify some of the issues such that in your next cloud purchase, you're armed with the right questions and knowledge to make an informed decision. So first, let's start with why cloud apps are becoming the norm and getting so much noise. Michael.
Thanks, Peter. I guess what we're seeing now is a rise of cloud-based applications. And there's a number of reasons about why people are moving and why we're seeing a lot of noise in the media, a lot of marketing hype around these cloud-based applications or software as a service. There's some real benefits to organizations about moving their on-premise applications into the cloud, so to speak, in inverted commas. And some of those are, there's You don't have to go through the on-premise upgrade process. Everybody's on the same version, and it simplifies the management from an operations, so a technology operations perspective, because the vendor is managing a single version, and you don't have multiple versions. You don't have that annual or biannual upgrade process. The other reason that there's a rise is there's a lower total cost of ownership, because you don't have this on-premise server, or even, and a lot of the time in the last 10 years, we've moved from physical servers on-premise to virtualization, but that still requires your internal IT people to maintain, support, patch, upgrade the servers. And it also requires your HR tech teams to maintain, patch, and upgrade the applications. All of this adds to your total cost of ownership. The other thing that we're seeing is this consumerization of apps. It's a big trend. It's a big trend across IT in general. And that's meaning that we're getting a lot of new types of apps quickly coming out. And that the speed of being able to produce a cloud-based application means that they're easier to get to market, which is why we're getting this speed. We're also seeing the ability to have this hyper-specialization. And that allows organizations or software developers to create very specialized applications to meet a very niche need. Something that's not possible really in an on-premise world. And I guess, well, so I'll take that back. It was possible in an on-premise world, but what you ended up having is your internal IT department would build this real specialized app just for you, and your organization would get burdened with this technology debt. So there's this big rise of cloud over the last few years. It's a big marketing term, and there's a bit of hype over it. And what we're seeing, what I see, and it really irks me, is this real cloud versus fake cloud. Just taking an on-premise application and getting it hosted is not really cloud, because you're still, all you're doing is you're moving that on-premise single tenanted, to use a bit of a technical concept, application to infrastructure that you no longer manage. The benefits of cloud being multi-tenanted, single version for everybody, shared infrastructure, you really don't get. And so we're seeing it's a bit of marketing spin, which is okay. Marketing's got its place.
Is it fake cloud does deliver some benefits?
Certainly does.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not bad. It's just one of those things, as Peter, you were saying earlier, HR needs to start to understand what they're buying and be able to sort of talk that through. And we are seeing within the HR tech space in Australia a rise and a demand for cloud-based applications. So the 2014 HR technology report that we put out last year had 5% of core HR systems were actually operating in the cloud. Yeah, that's below where the US is and parts of Europe, but 24% of respondents on that survey really said that their preference for any HR tech in their organization is cloud-based or software as a service. And another 20% actually said they didn't have a preference, which meant they'd take on-premise or cloud. So there is this demand in the marketplace for cloud-based applications for HR. So, you know, that's probably some of the rise. What we might do, Peter, is have a little bit of an audience poll.
Yeah, so Ben, can I get you to... So what we want to do now is ask the audience, you know, for your next HR systems purchase, what deployment model are you considering? So, you know, are you looking for on-premise only? Are you looking for a cloud solution? Well, you don't really care. You don't have a preference because you're just looking for the right solution. So if we can get people to put in their votes, and we'll wait a couple of seconds till we get a good majority you've voted. A few more seconds. And yeah, we might close the poll. It always just keeps ticking over more tantalizingly, more complete. Okay, that might be enough now. So if we show those results, wow, look at that, 70% for cloud solutions only. Yeah, and 30% for no preference. So
it's a really nice even number.
It is.
And, that's not surprising. I think we're seeing, the on-premise comes with a lot of burden.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So, Michael, do you want to talk us through
the impacts?
Yeah, the impacts.
I really love your Lego, Peter.
This is, by the way, this is my theme images, if anyone's wondering.
Look, there are a number of impacts of cloud. Moving to cloud is not as simple as just waking up one day and saying, hey, everything's in the cloud. There is impact, and there's things that you need to be aware of. The first one, and it's not necessarily the most important one, but a lot of the times it'll get raised by your internal IT or your risk people, is data sovereignty and privacy. It's definitely an issue. You are handing over potentially personally identifiable data to a third party. There are, as part of the new Australian privacy principles, there are controls that need to be in place around when you're offshoring data. But for a lot of Australian organisations, employee data is a grey area for the privacy principles, but at the same time, being concerned about how your cloud provider handles your data is very important. And there is quality and audit controls that they can put in and certifications that they can get that tend to be actually at a higher level than most internal IT departments operate at. And so, it's important to realise, and it's something to look at, but I see it as an easily overcomable issue once you've got satisfied the legal guys and the risk guys. The other probably bigger issues to worry about and the bigger impacts is what we're calling a hybrid model, and that's where you've got this mixture of on-premise and cloud applications. Great example, but an example of that, if you go to the big end of town, SAP with their SuccessFactors and Oracle with their Fusion products or their HCM product are looking at sort of these hybrid models where if you take SAP and their SuccessFactors, their Employee Central product, they've built tightly integrated between their two products that they can have their on-premise SAP still exist and run the financials or run supply chain and all those things and have it integrated in real time into their cloud-based Employee Central. And that's sort of mixing this old school and new school. And, that's something to understand, and that does create some additional challenges around integration. The other couple of challenges and impacts is sources of truth. If you end up with these cloud-based applications that aren't integrated, you then have to start talking about who's the source of truth for your application, for your data, and where's the data flowing, and is it manually being rekeyed, and that can get really nasty.
And that can come down to a really granular level. So it's just not about who owns employee personal details. It might be who owns a particular attribute about an employee's personal details.
Yeah, and when does that get created and who drives it? Really nitty-gritty type stuff. The other thing to worry about the impact is vendor management. Your relationship with vendors changes, but you also have the ability necessarily to get yourself even more vendors, which relates to your sources of truth. And your vendor management changes because the model of cloud-based applications from a financials point of view, just as a quick aside, is different for software vendors, and so you need to understand that. But probably the biggest impact is integration. And in our HR technology report last year, after data privacy and security, integration was the second highest barrier to adopting cloud apps, with 16% of people said it was the major barrier stopping them going ahead with it. Because, our previous attempts and our previous ways of doing integration just don't work. Going on-premise to cloud can be tricky. You've got to get the data going into the on-premise system. You're then dealing with opening up firewalls, having IT connect applications, and it can be really difficult. And sort of this story really needs to change. And I guess that's the whole premise of what we're here to talk about and sort of talk through with sort of the integration work we're doing with organisations like PeoplesHR.
Yep.
Back to you, Peter.
Thanks, Michael. Come on, go to me. Okay, so really we kind of get to the crux of the webinar, I guess, which is about integration and what HR needs to know. Look, at a high level, and we'll delve down into some of the common methods of cloud integration, but it's really about being educated to cut through some of the vendor speak. Because as we've mentioned, cloud integration is still very much a moving target. There's a lot of different transportation mechanisms and technical methods of doing this. You know, there's a real requirement now with the boom in HR technology for HR to become more tech savvy. It's just an absolute requirement. And really, what we think is essential is you need to be educated, such that you can ask the vendors the right questions and you know what they support. And look, some of the methods, while they might seem quite traditional, like CSV flat file type integration, they're still a valid integration method in today's cloud apps. We'll talk about the common methods of cloud integration, and we'll go into that in detail in the next couple of slides. And I guess what HR needs to know is, in our opinion, we think it will get easier eventually. That as like in the consumer world and the business to small business type world, that integrating cloud app to cloud app is just kind of a point and click and just, yep, I want my system to talk to this other system. That in the enterprise software space, that's where it's going. And we've seen those trends follow in all types of other areas in technology, that business software follows consumer technology.
And yeah, the integration will get easier, but it's probably going to get harder first, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And
or not hard, yeah, harder or more confusing.
Yeah,
confusing. Yep. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the common integration methods. The first one is a good old flat file, what I'd call the old school integration method, because, you know, flat file integration has been around since day dot. For on-premise systems, that and sort of direct database connections tend to be the standard internally, very point to point, a lot of spaghetti cloud. The orchestration is sort of through scheduled jobs, cron jobs, like it used to be on Unix or whatever the equivalent on Microsoft is. You can tell my flavors. Or sometimes via FTP or SFTP, which is the kind of new secure-based version. Look, the great thing about a flat file and saying, here's some information, here's a data set I'm sending from one system to another in a file, it's got the ability to handle quite large data sets. And that's a real plus if you're moving big amounts of data to a data warehouse from a payroll system. They tend to be very legacy compatible. So a lot of the old systems, the only way you can communicate with a legacy payroll system is via upload CSV file. And of course, the other pro is you can create them quite easily. You know, good old the business tool that's on everyone's desktop, which is Excel, has the ability to create a CSV or a tab delimited file. You know, more modern times, XML has emerged as well as a flat file standard, and it overcomes some of the limitations of CSV, but purely just as a data moving mechanism, it's not the best. And some of the disadvantages of a flat file is it works very well when you're sending over a big chunk of data, a batch job, but it doesn't work if you're just drip feeding into another system of record updates or changes or deltas, as we call them. The other disadvantage is it doesn't support a one-to-many relationship. So what I mean by this, if you're sending over an employee's personal details from a payroll system to a recruitment system, and they've got one-to-many emergency contacts for that person, you can't really handle that in a CSV file. or if an employee has multiple bank accounts for their pay disbursement, you kind of got to set a finite limit of alternate bank accounts in a transport file. And the other con is there's no self-validation of the file. And for those who come from a payroll background like myself, or a payroll system background, those big, massive timesheet loader type capabilities in a lot of the payroll systems where, payroll will collate, Excel files from all the different departments, create one humongous CSV file,
and then upload it.
And then there's an error because of the formatting, or there's a two-step process to upload that file. One to validate the file itself, and the second one to actually load it. So that's what cloud plumbing with flat files look like. And look, it is a viable method for cloud apps to use CSV. So for example,
it's very common with the hybrid model, not from a similar vendor. So if you're going to get data out of your payroll system into a cloud application or vice versa, it's pretty well commonly used.
Yeah, and cloud reporting tools like our own Planning at Work, which is a cloud-based organisational charting workforce visualisation. The only method you can get information into it is via CSV. Visio, which is a workforce analytics product, again, the only way you can push information into it is CSV via SFTP.
And they're both examples of using larger data sets, which not in real time, so it actually makes sense architecturally as well.
Yeah. Okay, so the next type of cloud integration or cloud plumbing, as you could call it, is APIs and web services. The kind of this mythical APIs and web services. There's
been around for a long time.
They're around for a long time. They used to call RPCs. Could you call them remote procedure calls?
Wow. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But I guess now some of the hype around web services and APIs is now starting to become reality as more and more applications move to the cloud. And basically what an API stands for, Application Programming Interface. But basically it's just an endpoint out there on the internet somewhere that a vendor is hosting that allows you to talk to it programmatically to either push or pull information in or out of that system. It uses formats, so the sort of default information description mechanism for APIs and web services is usually either XML or JSON, which is a kind of a more modern version of XML. Maybe that's not the best.
No, yes. But both XML and JSON, I guess, the reason they're more modern, if you want to put them in inverted commas, is they describe the data, they're easily readable and consumable by both people and applications. So it's a common format.
Yep. And a great thing about APIs and web services is they're like certified doorways into your application that a program can speak to. As you see in a lot of payroll or HR systems, the only way you can really enter or retrieve data is via the user interface. APIs and web services give you a programmatic doorway into the application, and this then allows developers to extend the functionality or create new applications against this. And in the consumer world, again, you point back to the consumer world, just about every consumer app you can think of has a full suite of APIs around it that allows third parties to extend and enhance that. And Twitter and Facebook are probably the most common examples of that. So the great thing about APIs and web services, it is the de facto data exchange mechanism for the web. It's absolutely. It offers a stable integration endpoint across customers because everyone's on the same version of the cloud app. Everyone's pretty much on the same version of the APIs. They don't move as often, and it allows you to build these really stable integrations. And the other great thing is it encourages marketplaces and ecosystems around applications, such that third-party developers have created their own little plugins and add-ons around there, which we'll come to next. Probably one of the bad things about this, and we kind of find this where we do with our employee onboarding system, HROnboard, we have a suite of APIs around our product. But if you want it to talk to your internal system, someone still needs to actually build some glue to get the two endpoints talking. So there still is technical effort required to integrate the two apps together. It just gives you a common building block to do that. So our third type of cloud plumbing is what we call connectors. There's no real standard terminology for what we'd call a connector. Some people call it an add-on, a plugin, out-of-the-box integration. There is no industry standard for this term, but basically it's an out-of-the-box integration between two applications. And this is where two cooperating vendors have come together and said, hey guys, we want to build this point-to-point integration between the two systems, let's do it. You usually leverage off existing APIs that you both have because, again, that's an easy way to push and pull information programmatically between those two applications. The connector is not always the two vendors. Sometimes it is a third party, but more and more in the enterprise world, it is the two vendors.
Yeah. And it's really the two vendors that are starting to do the heavy lifting.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to worry about it as a customer.
Yeah, and look, the ideal here is for customers is integration between two systems just works. There's no system integration services and there's no additional cost for you. It's just plug and play, literally. It's one common integration, and like Michael said, the vendors do the heavy lifting. The bad kind of news about this is it's still got a low adoption by enterprise cloud vendors for now. We really see, and we really think that you'll see more and more common integration connectors being developed between the popular systems, and that the rise of cloud apps having publishable APIs and documentation around those will encourage that as well.
And just because, and probably this is a key point, is just because a vendor says they've got APIs doesn't mean that it can communicate with your other systems, because you need that middle layer glue to connect it all together. And that's the bit, it's still data integration, and having done this for so many years, it's still a nasty little bit. And this is where those out-of-the-box plugins are really valuable, and we're going to see a lot more growth, and that's what will be fantastic.
Yeah. And look, probably one of the challenges with connectors is the ability for a customer to actually customize that particular integration where they have a particular requirement, and this is a challenge of cloud apps in general. And there's starting to be more solutions around how do you let a customer customize their, what we'd call a tenant, in terms of I've got additional fields and business rules I want to cater for within the application, and then how would that flow through into an integration?
And so as an example, with People's HR, we've had sit down on both sides, talk through the requirement, what does the systems need, what are the mandatory data requirements, to make sure that both sides of the fence, when you turn this on, it just works.
Yeah, and we'll show you an example of that connector in a couple of minutes. Okay, so before we do that, let's just take a quick look at where we see the future of cloud integration going. And really, what I think you want to look to is towards the consumer market and the small and medium business space in terms of business apps, because that's really where a lot of the innovation starts, and slowly, the enterprise software space catches up. What we think is, look, there'll be a lot more cloud vendors who will be publishing APIs and developer info around their products. And this is already happening to an extent, but, from their website, you'll be able to find their published APIs, and they'll have a developer.their domain name website that gives you a lot of documentation about how to extend and enhance their applications. And that's something, at HROnboard, we have published APIs that you can find from our website and code examples and code snippets to show you that. You'll see a lot more, as I've said, you'll see a lot more out-of-the-box connectors from enterprise vendors. And also what this encourages is marketplaces around some of the bigger ERP players. And SAP are already developing a marketplace. Some of the bigger vendors already have a marketplace where you can extend and enhance the functionality. And it's a really just click and drag type extension.
Yep.
Saba, a learning management vendor, also has that capability. And what you'll then find is, because there's so many cloud apps out there that have really good integration stories, you then get these third-party players who are what we'd call integration as a service providers, which is a common term. They'll be providing their own connectors between systems. And there's a couple of little shots here. There's a company called Zapier out of the US who basically do third-party connectors between common apps that you might use, like Google Apps or a CRM, Xero, that sort of thing. So you can go to Zapier and create your own little, I think they call them recipes, and you can say, when I add a new contact record in my CRM, I want that same contact record to update my address book on my contacts.
And there are, on Zapier, there are some actual, HR tech companies have already got stuff in there.
Yeah. Yep.
You can go, not many, but you can start to plug and play these mainly into some of the SME or the smaller end accounting systems like Xero or Sasu and things like that.
Yep.
So let's look at the People's HR stuff.
Okay, so just for those who don't know People's HR, People's HR is a cloud-based HRIS suite, so they offer a full suite of modules from recruitment, payroll, leave management, performance management, everything. So they're built for the cloud applications, so they're not a legacy vendor that's just gone cloud. They're true what we'd call software as a service. We have Wajira and Dulantha here from People's HR, who can answer any questions for you when we get to the questions. But what we've done is we've recognised, commercially between two vendors, there's a shared audience there between People's HR and our application, HROnboard, that People's HR don't have an employee onboarding capability in their suite. They go straight from recruitment to payroll. And as Michael was talking about before, this hyper specialization that's happening, and employee onboarding is a classic example where 3 or 4 years ago, no one would consider buying a dedicated employee onboarding system. Today, there's a large demand for that dedicated employee onboarding that does the offer preparation, has a portal for the candidate to come in, do all their paperwork, and that flows into the back office. So what we've identified is that, it would be good business for both of us as vendors to have an integration there such that when you're recruiting through the People HR recruitment module, once you've selected your candidate that you want to offer a job to, you can push that candidate and the position information straight to HROnboard. HROnboard will automatically prepare the offer and receive all that data ready to send to the candidate. Because HROnboard is a kind of midstream system, we receive candidate information from downstream systems like recruitment. Once the candidates accepted their offer in HROnboard, completed their tax, their personal information, their super, their bank details, obviously the next logical step is to then push that into the payroll system to perform the new hire process. So this connector that we've developed with People's HR is really a two-way connector, because we're receiving the candidate information, but once they've been onboarded, we want to push that back into the payroll module of People's HR. This connector that we've developed works around using the APIs that are available in both systems. So like we discussed before, we use those programmatic methods. And look, there is development work required on both sides to create this connector. So it's really an agreement we go into between two vendors to do that. So just a couple of screenshots to show you in action how this would work. So here what you can see is we've got a job up and we've got some applications for this particular job. We're looking at Dan Barnes, who looks like a good candidate for this job, and we want to select him. If we go through onto this next screen within the People's HR application, here's a list of the candidates for this job. And really, if we're timed to select a candidate and say, yep, this is the person we want to make an offer to, we can just check that box and say, yep, this is the guy we want to do, and click the button to move to HROnboard. When we do this, behind the scenes, you know, People's HR is calling our API to create a candidate, and that will move that information directly into HROnboard. And I think I got my screen orders wrong. So maybe it's not. So this is now HROnboard. So once a HR person logs into our application, they can see that Dan Barnes has been prepped in HROnboard. All the information about the candidate and about the position has flowed through. We've created the employment contract based on the business rules around the position and so forth. And really what we do is it doesn't automatically, we've made a business decision within HROnboard not to automatically send that out to the candidate as a job offer, but really here's a manual step now for a recruitment officer to go into HROnboard, eyeball the record, make sure it's okay, and click send to candidate. And that's really what we want to do. But, you know, obviously the benefits here is that there's no manual transaction processing between one system to another. The record just appears, and we can identify the record that the source of this information has come from our recruitment system. Conversely, once that candidate has gone through the new hire process, filled in their paperwork and their details through HROnboard and formally accepted the offer, we then want payroll to process them in the payroll system. So again, in HROnboard, the screen in HROnboard where you can come in payroll can see that record. Now in HROnboard, yep, we can see their documents, their TFN details and all their forms and other information. We've got a button up here to say basically export to People's HR, and that will send that packet of information about that new hire straight through to the People's HR app and into the right data structures. If you want to get technical, the mapping has been done already for you between HROnboard and People's HR to
set them up for payroll.
Yeah, set them up for payroll. And again, in People's HR, you know, and we've been talking to a lot of payroll providers and a lot of payroll processing people, and their preference is that it gets queued up as a new hire, that someone in payroll still needs to go in and validate the record, but again, you've saved on the you know, the rekeying of information,
data accuracy, data re-entering, and this is it's a fairly, if I want to call it, simple example here, but it does save the payroll teams a huge amount of time. And even if you take it to the basic level where it's not using APIs like we're showing here, you know, we've done with some of the other more common applications in Australia, such as HRIS 21, you can create the necessary, you know, integration files or the GTRs in HRIS 21's case that can be just pasted straight into the application and the data entry is done immediately. So there's a huge benefit here for on the payroll side in this particular scenario.
And this is a good example where integration is still changing and a moving target, because often, you know, during a sales cycle for HROnboard, you know, the wish from the customer is that I just want straight into my payroll system, and obviously that's the kind of the golden goose. We just want straight through processing. The reality is when you delve down into you know, some of the complexities of that you're never going to achieve that full straight through processing. There always will be some type at the moment, and where the technology exists at the moment, there's still some manual intervention, manual eyeballs required before it flows straight through to the payroll system.
And a lot of the time that's for a payroll, on the payroll side, that's a safety net.
Yeah.
A lot of payroll people like that, prefer it.
Yep. Okay, so that was just an example of how, these connectors between cloud apps can work, and it gives you that example there. I guess, wrapping up in terms of the key takeaways that I hope you can take away from today's webinar is that, cloud apps are really changing the way integration works. And really the reality has now nearly caught up to the dream of cloud. Cloud applications make it easier for applications to talk to each other. There's a new breed of apps, and consumerization will change that enterprise integration. One of the stories we haven't touched on here is the best of breed versus all-in-one argument. And what we're seeing is usually it's a hybrid approach, but most organizations still want those point solutions to add value in the areas they really care about. And the ability, this easierness of integration is making that more possible.
Yep.
And the ability to exchange data between apps is really becoming crucial, particularly in this age of analytics and big data, where organizations want all this information and data analytics coming from their systems to make better informed decisions. Another key takeaway is understanding the integration methods available. HR, like I said in the introduction, really needs to be more tech savvy and have a working knowledge of limitations and opportunities with integration, so they can ask the right questions from vendors. And that goes into my last point, is that no app is an island, and we encourage you to look for vendors who we think get integration. And, particularly both Michael and I have spent a lot of time talking to other vendors and software providers out there. And I think it's really important when you're choosing your next system, make sure it has got a good integration story. You can do things like ask for a developer's guide or a developer's kit, ask for their API documentation, look for things like, is there a marketplace or an integration area on their website, and actually start diving into some of the details, because I think there's a lot of, sometimes it's not deliberate, sometimes it is deliberate, but I think there's a lot of misinformation out there being spooked by vendors about this as they try to play catch up with some of the technology behind this. So that's about it for today's webinar. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you to Michael, and thank you to the guys from PeoplesHR for your assistance putting this webinar together. We'll take some questions now.
There is one question that's come through just about method of connectivity from the cloud, talking about risks and the impacts. And I get that's a really good question. Wasn't something we were going to go in detail in this session because it can get quite technical, but generally with if I use the cloud connectors or APIs, they go across the internet. Usually they're using the standard HTTPS, which is the encrypted type transport. And so that keeps the data secure as it goes across, because it is encrypted using the same technology that you use when you connect to your bank to do internet banking. And so that's sort of one of the ways. You can do VPNs and direct links, but that's really more point-to-point, and I'd call it older style integration. And there is stuff, you do need to understand how the data is being transported and make sure that the vendors are using things like HTTPS and encrypted data and public key, private keys, and all of that type of stuff.
Michael, we have one here. Where does user experience come into play when you're creating various API connectors to many HRIS applications?
Yeah. Where does it come? Well, it should be seamless. It should be seamless to make so the user experience is, in some regards, it's hidden. The users don't know it's there. It just, this elusive magic, it happens. Unfortunately, most of the time it's not like that.
There is, I think, what we're finding particularly around HROnboard is that data mapping exercise. Because in our system, yes, we have the concept of objects around a new hire or a candidate, if you want to call them, and the position that they're occupying. But when you go to map that out to send that information to a payroll system, you then need to map out, the tax, the bank details, those sort of objects to the associated payroll system objects, and our field names are different to their field names. So there is a translation file and analysis that needs to happen.
That's done up front, and the user experience is much easier.
Correct.
You don't need to worry about that.
Correct. There's another question here just asking one about our app, can it be installed locally? And this is a question you get amongst a lot of cloud applications is, yeah, we love your application, but we want our own, well, it's not our own version, but we don't want to go out in the cloud. We don't want to have our data shared on a common instance, despite all your proclamations about, the separation of tenants and all that sort of stuff. This is where the cloud market is maturing, because a couple of years ago, that was a hard question, and vendors like Oracle come out with the private versus public cloud, and, big government departments, we can have, you can run our cloud app in your own instance, in your own data centers. What we're seeing is there's more and more technical solutions to some of these problems where, if you take Amazon Web Services, they have a concept of what they call S3, which is their simple storage solutions, where there's now possibilities for you to bring your own storage mechanism to a cloud app such that your data passes through a hosted cloud app by a vendor, but when the data is at rest, it's within your managed infrastructure.
And that starts to move into the whole technology around containers with Docker. So we start, it's a highly technical and different sort of discussion, but it's getting, so from, I guess, HROnboard as it stands, no, it can't, but and that's because that then, by installing a cloud-based app on-premise, you move away from some of the benefits of a cloud-based app, but we're getting technology, pick on Docker as an example, that would allow containers to be orchestrated in various parts, and that container could be on your infrastructure or on the vendor's infrastructure. That's probably a topic for a different
it's a topic. I find this really interesting because I can see the arguments where there's some organisations and government departments who absolutely don't want their data anywhere else except under their control. And if technically, as a cloud vendor, I can provide a solution that enables me as the vendor to keep everyone on the same version and orchestrate their application, but their data's their data, to me, that's a perfect solution. So it's something we're monitoring closely.
There are a lot of questions. I'm not sure we'll get through them all, will we?
Look, probably one last question we had was, all the big vendors, what's their incentive to integrate? If I'm a big all-in-one, full-blown functionality HRIS provider, why should I integrate? If I'm a Workday, why should I integrate? Do you want to?
Well, Workday integrates a lot, so I guess a lot of them.
But if I've got and we see this, I'm a full-blown HRS. I have an onboarding solution. It may not be very good, but why should I allow my application to then integrate to a pure play onboarding solution or a recruitment vendor when I've already got a recruitment module?
Can't we all just play nice? No, there is. I mean, it's that's a difficult question because in some regards there isn't an incentive for them, which is part of the problem. But at the same time, the more times that your customers go and get a point solution to start moving around the limitations of your application, the less control you have over the whole experience. If you pick on the big vendors, if you're not providing those, I guess, all the functionality that your customers want, and they keep going out and buying these hyper-specialized applications, eventually you'll be pushed out. Or what will happen is we'll end up with this great corporate IT fight of shutting down all of the rogue IT activity. So nobody wins in that environment, and you end up with challenges around your sources of truth of data, and it just becomes a mess. And so for everyone's benefit, most of these vendors are starting to move and opening it up. In fact, it's probably the mid-tier section that are less open than the large enterprise vendors.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everyone. Well, thank you today for attending our webinar. We hope you got something out of it. Thank you, Michael, for your contribution.
Thank you, PeoplesHR, and their contribution.
Exactly. And look, if you want to, this webinar is being recorded. It will be up on the HROnboard blog site by the end of the day, hopefully. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to either myself or Michael on some of the contact details listed, and keep following our blog for when the next webinar events are. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.